I'm a bit of an astrological minimalist. Having said that, this year is nuts. All of these 4 planets are changing signs within the same year. This has never happened before. When they hit these mathematically designated points that are based upon sacred geometry, the energy of how they express changes. We are at the liminal edge between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius. The lunar nodes, or the nodal axis, is the place where the moon's orbit going around the Earth intersects with the Earth's orbit going around the sun, creating a node which the Vedas call Maya. Now we're getting to the real meaning of why nodes and Indra's net are so important. Evolution is moving us to higher and higher frequencies into non-physical dimensions. There's obviously levels of consciousness that are available to more people now on the planet than ever before, and astrology is simply one map to allow us to go through. But this now is both the great potential and the great problem, because one of the things that makes me crazy about most astrologers is that every month is the most pivotal month ever. Every new moon is the most important new moon that has ever occurred. And every year coming up is like, this has never happened before. It really does make me crazy. So I'm a bit of an astrological minimalist. However, having said that, this year is nuts.
Can you tell us a little bit more about why you're saying it is nuts? Tell us a little
Well,
bit what you mean
yes,
by
and it
that.
would actually really require maybe about 4 to 6 hours to unfold the fullness of what the intensity and power of this period of time is. And when I say this period of time, I mean a sweep of this November, December, January, February, March, April into 2025. I also mean a sweep of January of 2020 through 2027. Of course, January of 2020 was the beginning of the events that created the entire planetary lockdown and all of that. And so that is part of the sweep that we're still in. And then on top of that, there is another sweep that began in the 1960s that is actually playing through through the 2010s and all the way through the 2025 or so. And then we have the once every 250 year sweep of Pluto's cycle, and Pluto coming back into Aquarius, where it hasn't been since the American and French revolutions both occurred with Pluto at this position in the sky. Of course, everything else is different. And maybe the most important thing that's different, that changes the game of everything that any astrologer has ever said, and that is we are in a technological rocket ship. That that hyperbolic curve that goes up and up, and then it kind of raises, and then all of a sudden it goes straight up. Well, we are on that launch pad, and you don't need to be an astrologer to know this, but most astrologers don't think that has anything to do with what's going on. And so all these separate rivers are feeding into, they're all tributaries into this estuary that's dumping into the cosmic sea right now. And it makes this period of time extraordinary.
Yeah, you're referring to Ray Kurzweil and the singularity a little bit there as well, right? Like this sort of technological transformation that we're going through.
Yeah, people people have AI on their brains right now, but it's not AI that's going to matter if we are talking about Ray Kurzweil. We're talking about ASI, which is artificial superintelligence. And we are actually in a range where we are dealing with artificial intelligence, AI. But I actually think there's 4 acronyms, yeah, that are relevant to the period of time that we're going into. One of them is AI, or ASI. One of them is AR, which is quite different than AI. That's augmented reality. And the two are actually different. And with augmented reality, we're talking about technologies, like Apple Vision and Google Glasses, but we're also talking about augmented hearing and hyper seeing and all these things that are going to be they're not really artificial intelligence. They're basically a nervous system, silicon or nervous system exotechnology interface that's going to become more and more important. So the acronyms are AI or ASI, AR, artificial intelligence, ET, which is obviously extraterrestrial, and there's several different threads there that have to do with extra, meaning outside of terrestrial Earth. So, and then the fourth one is EIEIO, which is Old MacDonald's farm. And I actually do have stories on each of those letters. But the important thing to understand about EIEIO is that on Old MacDonald's farm, there's horses and ducks and geese and pigs, and there's a plethora of different things that all have to exist on that farm. And that becomes another significantly important thing to what's happening with the increased speed of technological communication and the extension of our internal nervous system into an exonervous system. And this biological evolution basically throws everything else into a different realm than it's ever been in before.
It's interesting you say that because in some ways it's
Mhm.
hard not to reflect on astrology sort of being like an exosystem as well to an internal nervous system. So, but can't help but feel like this is somewhat of a synthetic exosystem. And this was really interesting because as you were talking earlier, I couldn't help but reflect on for some people, astrology is kind of it is a little bit woo, right? It's like, oh, Mercury's in retrograde, and all of a sudden, like things aren't lining up for me, right? And some people find that kind of like, oh, that's just an excuse. But for other people, it's like, actually, no, you can palpably see that, like, communications are down. Like, why is your flight not taking off right now? Mercury happens to be in retrograde. Anyway, I won't get into all of
So,
that, but
so here, no,
it's
here's the thing though. Astrology is woo or woo woo, as we might say, in the same way that someone who doesn't know how to do calculus looks at integrations on a page filled with formulas. They look at that and they go, this isn't real. This is woo woo. Astrology isn't something that needs belief. It's just a system that most people don't know about. And most people who judge astrology as something that's crazy or unscientific or the work of Satan or whatever the judgment is, basically are judging an astrology that is not the astrology that most astrologers are doing. And so astrology has this huge PR problem. At least mathematics has a public relations that connects it with high level of intelligence, and astrology suffers from bad PR.
well, the interesting thing I was also going to say to that, thank you for clarifying that, is that in terms of this like exo system that's coming through when we're diving into these acronyms that you referred to, everything except the EIEIO, which I'm very curious about. We've got the AR, the AI, the ET. Those seem to be somewhat well, especially the AR element to it, right? Like we're now coming off of what is grounded reality into like an augmented reality. That's the name of the acronym. And it's interesting, like, how do you find like a practice such as, or a belief system such as, or a field of study such as astrology to actually be somewhat grounding because it's actually grounded in the nature of the reality that we're experiencing?
Yeah, good question. And one of the fundamental axioms of astrology goes back to this apocryphal legendary character called Hermes Trismegistus, sometimes known as Thoth or Toth, an Egyptian character who, in whether he existed as a singularity, there's a different use of singularity, whether he existed as a person or not, basically is handed down to us through the mythological Hermes in Greece to the Mercury in Rome, that is the god, the mythological archetype of intellect and communication. And the Hermes Trismegistus, which really just means Mercury, the three times great. Tri Tris Megistus, a magi is basically a Zoroastrian priest because they were wise and they studied the stars. But in the Emerald Tablet, which is this alleged creation of antiquity's Hermes Trismegistus, the opening line is something that most people will have heard, and they've only typically heard the first few words of it. And that's as above, so below. And that's really one of the basic concepts of astrology. But what most people don't realize is that the Emerald Tablet goes on, and the full statement, just the first sentence, is as above, so below. The within of things is as the without of things. Now, what this means is that the above is not creating the below. As above, so below sounds like like an Aristotelian cause and effect, as above, so below. But the inside and the outside, according to Hermes Trismegistus, are not two separate things. They are one and the same. And the illusion is that there's an inside and an outside. This is the great illusion that Hindus might call Maya. It's the distraction of what we see in the three-dimensional reality around us, because that's our reality tunnel. That's what we perceive through our five senses. The fact of the matter is that the outside and the inside are one and the same. Quantum physics 101, the universe is intelligent, and we are reflecting that intelligence, So I just wanted to kind of clarify that a little bit. I'm not sure that fully really answers the question. Well, but there is one other thing that I would add to this, and that is that often when people think of astrology, they think of one half of astrology, which is really all that any astrologers ever thought of up until the Italian or the Florentine Renaissance. And that is that astrology is the study of what's out there, and it's ascension oriented. It's wanting to know reality by looking at the divine proportion, looking at the heavens. In fact, the Zoroastrian temples called ziggurats were actually stepped observatories. And even the three wise men, that's a bad translation. They were magi, and a magus or a magi was a Zoroastrian priest who looked at the stars to find the meaning here on earth. And so there's this whole thing in astrology that's about, to know your chart is to know where your Mercury is, to know where Jupiter is, to know what this angle between that is, what's your rising sign. All of this is putting the reality out there. And according to Plato, that's only one half the picture, because as spirit exists out there and is ascending, Catholicism, Judaism, Tibetan Buddhism, these are all religions of ascension. They're wanting to go upward into the divine proportion. Meanwhile, you have, and that's spirit. Meanwhile, you have soul, which is the incarnation of those energies. And this isn't Rick talking. This is Rick basically talking about Plato, because to Plato, soul was where spirit becomes incarnated. And therefore, we have this basic bifurcation of what we call yang or male energy, which is logical, it's linear, it's cause and effect, it's out there, it's thinking, it's reading an alphabet and doing logic and all of that kind of stuff, which is really where astrology came from, at least in the boys' club. And I always like to mention or remind us all that astrology is basically a product of the patriarchy. It was written by guys for guys, period. So that's another topic we can come back to that's very important, because this is part of the change that astrology is going through, and it has to do with the incarnation of the planets. In other words, one of the topics that I love teaching and working with through actual real physical experience and ritual is not knowing what's up there, but it's what are the practices to bring what's up there into our reality. Because it's not just ascension, it's also descension. It's not just knowing what's out there, it's also bringing what's out there and grounding it. And soul, elementally, according to Plato, and incidentally, this is also the origins of Jungian psychology, because, Jung didn't call his psychology Jungian psychology any more than Jesus called his teachings Christianity. It was, Jungian psychology. He called it analytical psychology, or his words, the psychology of four types. What were the four types? Thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuiting, that correspond one-to-one what Jung learned from the Greeks: fire, earth, air, water. And so now we come back to Plato, because fire and air are spirit. They're male. And I don't mean that sex male. They're yang. They're right hand, left brain. And fire and air is about this. It's about reaching upward and becoming God. Meanwhile, the earth and water, and this is with respect to your sense of the astrology as a grounding mechanism, earth and water are soul. Fire and air are spirit. And soul is like soul food, or or soulful, or soul music. It involves physicality. Fire and air is hot and dry and intellectual. That's spirit. And soul is down and dirty, and it's where the river meets the ocean. It's in the United States, Louisiana being at the end of where the Mississippi River feeds into the ocean, into the Gulf of Mexico. That's where jazz arose. That's where soul came from. I mean, the concept of soul, at least in the United States, there's this song called "Beat Your Feet on the Mississippi Mud." It's dirty and down and wet and human and physical and complicated, and it's yin. And it's inward. So part of what people don't realize about astrology is that there's a two-way street. And the person who actually brought this into the Western astrological tradition was a man named Marsilio Ficino, who most people don't know anything about. However, he was the court astrologer to 3 generations of Medicis while they were funding Leonardo da Vinci and Botticelli and Angelo Poliziano and creating what we call the Renaissance, or the Florentine Renaissance. And Marsilio Ficino was an ordained priest who was also the court astrologer, who was a bit of a magician and was given the job by the old man, Cosimo Medici, who had enough wealth that he bailed out the Catholic Church. Basically, he gave Marsilio Ficino the job of taking one of Medici's prized summer villas, and he gave it to Ficino with the command of turn this into a living Platonic academy. And this is a whole complicated story. It pissed the Pope off quite a bit, because all the bishops in northern Italy were going to study with Ficino, because he was the guy who translated Plato from Greek into Latin. This was an astrologer. But he basically brought humanity into the planets, into our bodies. And it's a very important concept that even most astrologers who are kind of revamping the astrology that they're doing in light of, more freedom of choice and things of that sort, and in light of Jungian psychology and other things, they still don't understand the big reason why this is all happening.
Hey there, Inspired Souls. Just wanted to take a quick second to thank all of you that are subscribed to the channel. Thank you so much for your incredible love and support. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please do take a moment. The button below, subscribe button, is lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution as I'm saying the word subscribe. Please hit that button, hit the bell notification icon. Everything you see around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to the channel. Help us promote love, positivity, and wisdom around the world through your subscription to the channel. Thank you so much in advance. Back to Rick in today's episode. It's really fascinating because for most people listening in to like the layperson, soul and spirit are actually completely interchangeable. And yet I love how you've just, torn that to shreds, because not torn soul or spirit to shreds. I don't want to sound rude, but just that idea that they're actually the same thing. It's actually quite an awareness to carry, that spirit is like somewhat upwards in its trajectory and soul is like from the bottom up. But there's a dance between the two. And I love how you're describing that there's like this reclamation of the other half of astrology.
And people who talk about reincarnation, which is another whole subject that could be a, hour long or day-long deep dive. But what happens at the moment of death is the soul leaves the body. That's the way they phrase it. And it's because when the soul leaves the body, it's Isaac Newton, a right-handed, left-brained, guy, who basically said the mind and the humans are just a tiny drop in this infinite universe. That's basically, the fear of being a particle in this incredibly large, infinite ocean. And then you had Rumi a few centuries earlier saying, nope, that's not the way it is. We're not a tiny drop in this large infinite sea. We are large enough that we contain the entire infinite sea. And so that's the difference between soul and spirit in some ways.
Okay, you've piqued my curiosity. You mentioned astrology is patriarchal, and
Oh,
then we're going through a shift. And it's interesting because as you were using the word incarnate, I could also not help but sort of feel like we incarnate. And obviously, there's this matrix nature. It's maternal, it's feminine. Like this is a feminine existence in many ways because of the way we experience it. What do you mean by this reclamation of this feminine astrology coming through?
First of all, the matrix and the M sound in most languages, whether it's mater, mother, mom, the matter, even matter, this is all about incarnation. So the matrix is what appears to be around us. It's like what we're trapped in some way.
Like a fish in water.
Yes, and it's important to understand, according to the media guru Marshall McLuhan, that environments are invisible. Fish don't see water any more than we see air. You know, but the thing here that is really, I think, significant about matrix and about that all of that energy is that there's no way for us to see it until we're outside of it. And I've done a lecture over the past few years that's my rather radical but well informed take or understanding of the concept of past lives or reincarnation. And the title of my lecture is Consciousness Con Carne. Now, we live here in the United States, north of Mexico. Chili con carne is chili with meat. We are consciousness with meat. And you hear people talk about, well, we have meat suits that at death we leave or whatever. But the point is that meat matter, the incarnation is only half of it. And whenever we talk about the incarnation of any energy, whether it's consciousness, which actually appears to do fine without meat, but that's another story also. But the fact is that we don't die, we disincarnate. We reincarnate and we disincarnate. That's the process. And I say we, it's consciousness, it's soul joining the larger sea of spirit and then vibrating itself back into the material realms. And when we talk about the material realms, we now know from quantum physics that the material realm is it's like looking at the surface of the ocean, thinking that we know the ocean. The great quantum physicist David Bohm talked about the implicate and the explicate order, and that we've been sidetracked by this illusion that three dimensions are what's real, when three dimensions are just the waves breaking the surface at the top. And so that's really one of the things that astrology begins to allow us to do, because, and that is to see what's under the top of the ocean, because the real action, and this goes back to my dear friend Bruce Lipton's work, who talks about boundaries, because one of Bruce's breakthroughs in his early work is the idea that consciousness is derived not from the brain, not from the DNA, not from the nucleus of a cell, but from the cell wall. That's where this thing from his work at Stanford as a medical, Stanford research fellow, his work on immunology of how does the inside of our body know that it's different than the outside. And this is where consciousness arises. The brain isn't the seat of consciousness. The brain is just a receiving mechanism, and it's a filter to filter out some of the noise that we can't handle. If we want to live, that noise, most people have experienced it either through psychotic episodes or through plant medicine or LSD or pranayama or yoga or breathing techniques. But there's obviously levels of consciousness that are available to more people now on the planet than ever before. And astrology is simply one map to allow us to go through that liminal, that wall between here and there, so that we can begin to understand what's really here. And this is something that everyone on the planet's going through. It doesn't matter whether you're an astrologer or not. And it's also partly the reason for this backwash or backlash of right-wing kind of fundamental conservatism, because it's very fearful going through this territory from visible three-dimensional, what you see is what you get, causal Newtonian mechanics that are based on billiard balls. If this ball's going this way, it hits that one, it goes that way. And all of a sudden we're in a quantum realm where there are no particles, there is no cause and effect. Everything seems to be a bit more chaotic, and we don't know what's around the next bend, and people just want to make America great again because Freud 101 talked about infantile regression, which means that under pressure, the mind goes back to someplace in the past where it felt safe. Whether it was or not is a different issue, but it goes back there in some way to protect itself from the pain, from the uncertainty, from the loss of ego control or boundary. And that's one of the things that we see going on all over the planet. What we're really seeing right now is the last gasps of patriarchy, colonialism, and capitalism. And don't ask me what replaces that, because it's going to take 100 or 200 or 300 years, just like no one knew what would replace a feudal system or a king, 3,000 years ago. That's how big the transition is that we're on the edge of.
Hi there, guys. I wanted to take a quick moment just to introduce you to my one-to-one coaching. It's something that I deeply love doing. As you can tell, conscious conversation is such a massive part of my life. And having one-to-one, deep, meaningful conversations with people where I get to show up as your brother or as the coach or as your mentor has been such a gift for me personally, and a gift for lots of the people that I have supported on the journey of living a more spiritually empowered, spiritually powered, spiritually aligned life. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's some examples of people all around the world that have experienced profound transformations through this coaching experience.
Amrit is a fantastic coach.
In a few sessions, he got to a depth that I'd only experienced before working with certain medicines. And
he's gone through a lot of the struggles that you're probably facing. And Amrit's been a really strong, supportive figure in my journey.
In control of myself.
I'm kinder to myself.
I actually have that vision and a purpose.
I do feel like I'm a better version of myself already.
Amazing energy.
He was easy to talk to, which made me easy to trust him.
Working with Amrit at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and really I was bouncing out of bed.
Whenever I get off the calls with Amrit, best money we've ever spent.
I would not recommend him because I don't want everyone to know about him, and then I won't be able to book him. If he gets too busy, I won't get my turn.
I would say absolutely.
There's no way you can work with Amrit for a period of time without being transformed.
So if you're considering him as a coach, do not hesitate, because you won't be disappointed.
Alrighty, so hopefully that's inspiring your evolution onwards and upwards. And if you are so inspired to evolve, you can book in a one-to-one call with me directly at www.amrit.coach/life. And guys, if I can say so myself, I do think this is something quite special. Most people that I see building things online don't really work with people this deeply, this intimately, one-on-one as things start to grow, just because it is so time intensive. And yet I'm so deeply passionate about the transformation that comes from one-to-one coaching that just isn't available anywhere else. It would be my absolute honor and a pleasure to support your spiritual awakening, your spiritual path, your spiritual unfoldment. It is my life's work. I look forward to seeing you in the call. Back to today's podcast. Yeah, the dance between order, chaos, and I love how you're referencing, like, one of my trippy dippy thoughts that I always reflect back on when it comes to the quantum is if no one's watching, does the universe exist? Because it's all about that observer. And like you said, when it all becomes non-particular and all becomes wave-like, and it's like, what do you tether yourself to? And obviously you mentioned the regression. It's just like easy to just be like, okay, back to the billiard balls. that was safe. Like, can you just take me back? I could just ground myself there. But evolution is underfoot. You mentioned we're coming through. Well, you mentioned Pluto and Aquarius. Obviously, that's a massive 250-year cycle. You spoke to that briefly, touched on what was going on. Didn't really describe the nature of what's ahead, though, but also 2020, 2027, you said. So there's a massive shift coming through. You don't have to explain what's coming up next, because I've also listened to enough of Rick Levine online to sort of say, hey, anybody that's telling you that I have all the answers, run.
Get the hell out of there.
Right?
Including me.
So I'm not going to get you to tell us what is coming up, but I would love to hear from the person that's tuning in right now. How can we consciously engage with this awareness, with the energies? There's obviously a massive shift underway. How does this allowing this into our awareness, how do we actually empower ourselves to sort of go, okay, stuff is shifting, stuff is happening. What does this mean as a call to arms for the individual tuning into this podcast?
Yeah. Actually, I'd like to take a short hit on the what's happening, because this is concrete, easy to understand stuff.
Take
if you don't lose it into
Take a big one.
astrological jargon.
Exactly. Yeah, please.
Basically, astrology looks at cycles. We think of the planets as particles. We look at a telescope and we see Saturn with rings, or we look at the moon and go, oh, the moon is full. It's a particle. Planets are particles, but we know if the above and below are the same thing, the same things that happen at the microcosmic quantum level, that there's this thing called the particle wave duality that basically shook modern physics in the early 1900s, because what we thought were particles are not particles. It seems that everything is vibration. As Pythagoras said some 2,500 years ago, everything is vibration and everything arises in mutual hum or sympathy or harmony with other vibrations. So the planets are particles, but the moon is also a 13 cycle per year vibration. Now, we don't hear that the way we hear music at 440 cycles a second saying, oh, that's A above middle C, or we don't understand the results of these frequency interactions like we do with computers or radios that are gigahertz, millions of cycles a second, or megahertz, millions, gigahertz, trillions, billions rather, or even kilohertz on AM radio, thousands of cycles a second. Instead, the planets are cycles per year, or Saturn 3 cycles a century, or Pluto 4 cycles a millennium. So the planets are not particles, they're particle waves, even though we perceive them as particles. And as such, they have a repetitive cycling function. My students I've trained my students to call planets BFPs, and that big fucking particles. But they're still particles when we look at them, just like light becomes a photon, a particle when we look at it. And when we're not looking at it, it's waving. Just like the person that chops the tree doesn't make a sound unless anyone hears it. It needs a sensory impact in order for the particle to occur out of the quantum soup. Of course, the other question that then is often asked is that if a man is speaking in the woods and his wife isn't there to hear him, is he still wrong? So
the answer is yes, Rick. Come on.
And therefore the tree still makes noise when it falls. Okay. But here's the thing. We have the slower moving planets, just like we can look at someone's horoscope and see where the planets were at the moment they took their first breath. And that patterned integrity, to use a concept developed by Buckminster Fuller, that patterned integrity becomes the shape of our knot as long as we're in this meat suit. And our consciousness basically has to express itself through the shape of the knot of this physical body that we seem to create as we move through life. Now, what happens though is that as these slower moving planets move around, taking 250 years, like for example, for Pluto to go around once, or 84 years for Uranus, or even 30 years, 29 and a half years for Saturn. When they change signs, when they hit these mathematically designated points that are based upon sacred geometry, they're not based upon the stars, they're not constellations, they're a secondary artifact. They're based upon mathematics. And when planets hit those points and change signs, the energy of how they express changes. And we can look back in history and see this very clearly. There's an encyclopedic book, someone who might be a wonderful guest for you at some point in time, named Richard Tarnas wrote this book called Cosmos and Psyche. He's a PhD scholar, psychologist, who wrote a book called Passion of the Western Mind that Joseph Campbell said was the single best intellectual history of the world. So he has very high credentials. In his book, Psyche and Cosmos, based upon a post-Jungian metaphor of the outside and the inside are the same, psyche, cosmos, that basically you look at the evolution of technology and human thought, and they correspond frighteningly accurately to these outer planet changes throughout recorded history. So there's a whole deep dive study here, and Rick Tarnas is one of the gurus. However, the first person who noticed this, incidentally, was the father of modern astronomy and perhaps the greatest astrologer of his century, and that was Johannes Kepler, who basically developed the laws of planetary motion because he was the court astrologer to the Holy Roman Empire, and he needed accuracy, which wasn't there in order to do his job. And it was Johannes Kepler who not only figured out the laws of planetary motion, but all of a sudden was able to do through his calculations where a planet was 2,000 years ago. And he realized that what we call the Star of Bethlehem as an origin story of Christianity was very likely a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in the sign of Pisces. Now, there's a deep dive there, but the fact is that prior to his mathematical breakthroughs, no human could have ever known that. We now have computers at the drop of a hat. I can say, calculate the exact time and time of day for the last 3,000 years of every Jupiter-Saturn conjunction and show me the mathematics of the sacred geometry that they were creating with all the other planets in the sky. That's where astrology is now. It's basically a tool to bring previously invisible systems into consciousness.
Yeah. And so Kepler's unlocked that for us. You were going to leverage this to tell us about what's going on at this particular moment in time then, and how we support ourselves at navigating this time.
So most astrologers around the planet over the last couple of years have been talking about Pluto's return into the sign of Aquarius, partly because there is a 26,000 year cycle based upon the Earth's wobble that creates what we astrologers call 2,176 year ages. For the last 2,000 years, approximately, we've been in the age of Pisces, which means the area of sky we call Pisces seems to be on the eastern horizon around the beginning of spring in the northern hemisphere. That changes by 1 degree every 72 years, meaning that every 2,100 and some odd 70 years, that 30-degree changes make a change in sign. So we've spent 2,000 years now in the age of Pisces, which is the fish. The predominant religion on the planet was a religion whose symbol is built upon the fish. It's the multiplicity in the singularity, and Pisces is a mystical sign. In fact, there's a very deep dive that we could do on the correspondences between Pisces and Christianity. But if we go back 2,000 years prior to that, because the wobble of Earth is backwards, and so we go from the age of Pisces 2,000 years prior to the age of Aries. And that was the rise of the angry fire god, the Paschal Lamb, the Passover, the Jewish tradition, the singular monotheism. You go back 2,000 years prior to that, and you have the old Egyptian, you have the rise in the early Vedic period, the worship of the Taurus, age of Taurus, cow. It's the worship of the golden calf in Egypt and the sacredness of the cow in the Vedic tradition. So these 2,000-year ages are very significant, and we are at the cusp, or maybe the liminal edge between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius. There are a lot of people who are running around saying this already is the age of Aquarius. The Broadway show Hair back in the 60s, this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. It's very likely that the technical side of this is that the age of Aquarius actually won't begin for about another 100 years. But we're talking about a 26,000-year cycle, and so there is a century or so of coming and going, and that the birth of Jesus is very likely tied to the beginning of the age of Pisces. And so Aquarius is on everyone's, on astrologers' minds and culturally. So Pluto's return for the first time in 250 years into the sign of Aquarius. And from the Earth's point of view, the planets go forward and then they look like they go back. That's called retrograde. It's because the Earth is moving around inside the orbit. And so planets go forward, backward, forward. They're not really. That's the illusion, whether it's a Mercury retrograde or a Pluto retrograde. And Pluto tipped into the sign of Aquarius back in March, a year and a half ago of 2023, within 1 day of ChatGPT being announced as a publicly available tool. And Aquarius is the sign that has to do with technology, the future, with disincarnate consciousness. It's the consciousness that we share as community, as humanity. Aquarius is not the sign of you and me. It's the sign of everyone together and what that means. And so as Pluto touched into Aquarius 250 years ago, we had for the first time nation states that were being created without the divine rulership of some bloodline that was the owner of the country, whether it was a king or a queen or a royal family or whatever. And this was the French Revolution, was basically a revolt against the monarchy in France and set up a republic that was basically based on freedom. And the United States of America, and of course, both of these experiments, have their problems and had their problems from the beginning. But the concept of the United States of America was a Pluto and Aquarius concept based upon overthrowing the King of England. And it was based upon creating a nation state that was based upon the community of who those people were as a collective rather than an individual ruling. And again, part of what we're seeing is individuals grabbing control. Again, as I'm saying, is the last throes of we're not going to let this concept of, go. But we have Pluto moving into Aquarius. And that's why we're seeing these breakthroughs in technology that are speeding up this hyperbolic, jump towards singularity, or what Terence McKenna called time wave zero, however you want to frame it. It's moving faster than it's ever moved. And that's one of the reasons why no one can predict what's around the edge, what's around the corner, there's no corners, what's around the curve.
Hey there, inspired souls. Rick is just a treasure trove of love, knowledge, wisdom. My goodness, this is such an incredible episode, touch wood. Now, I would love to hear from you in the comments below. What are your biggest takeaways from today's episode? What are you taking away? And also, are there any questions of Rick that you would love to get answered? Leave them in the comments below, and I'd be honored to ask them of him in the future when he returns to the channel. So leave them in the comments below as well. Without too much further ado, back to Rick in today's episode. Rick, I want to take a quick sec to ask you, just for those people that are tuning into the conversation, because we've got Pluto and you've referred to it as potentially one for one in terms of, we talked about cosmos and psyche, like in terms of the cosmos is Pluto, but in the psyche, it's your subconscious. We've got Mercury, which is also like your intellect in some ways. Can you give us like a quick 30-second potentially crash course on the planets and how they, what they represent in our psyche?
Yes, I could do that in a long paragraph, but I would want to do a sentence on Mercury and Pluto.
Please.
Because Mercury in Roman mythology, Hermes in Greek mythology, is a character or an archetype that exists in almost every indigenous culture around the planet. And Mercury's main job was he was a psychopomp. And a psychopomp is a guide between here and there. What's here and there? The three-dimensional world and all the others. And so Mercury, even though he's often considered the god of intellect or the heavenly messenger, Mercury is associated with being clever, with communication. All the MER words like mercantile, merchant, those are all about exchange back and forth that Mercury is basically involved in. But as such, Mercury's job is to guide us into the underworld, and Pluto is the lord of the underworld. And the underworld here, I have to do what I call my brief Christian disclaimer. The underworld isn't a place where we go to get punished. The underworld is a place that, as William Blake wrote, the English mystic poet from the early 1800s, William Blake wrote in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, he wrote something very close to hell is a place so beautiful it would torment an angel to insanity. Hell is the origin of all the magic. Hell is the darkness. Hell is your and anyone's dark night of the soul. It's the place where the seed is planted and fertilization and magic occurs. Hell is the underworld, which is everything that's not out here on the surface, meaning it is the Freudian, Jungian, depth psychology, subconscious, unconscious. That's Pluto's realm. And the great psychologist James Hillman wrote a book called The Dream and the Underworld. It's not an astrology book, even though he practiced astrology. And it's basically a book about the unconscious as being the realms of the hidden, of the underworld, of Pluto. And so Mercury is the way that we get back and forth from this world into that world. Mercury is the communicator.
It's got shamanistic properties.
Oh, yeah. Shamans are psychopomps in some ways because they're going into other worlds, coming back, or holding our hand while we're going into other worlds and then bringing us back. But that's exactly what Mercury's job is, even though from this perspective, a lot of people just write Mercury off as the trickster, which he also is. Mercury was a clever dude. But the close-in planets to Earth, and I say close-in from an astronomical perspective, the moon is the matrix. It's how we feel. It's our body. It's our mom. It's the womb. It's how we care for others. It's how others care for us. It's the changing of the emotions, the tide, that flow that's always in motion. The sun is like the central filament of our furnace system. We think of all the planets going around the sun, but that's not what's happening, because the sun is going around this black hole at the center of the Milky Way galaxy once every about 250 million years. So the sun is moving this way while the planets are going around it. So the planets are not creating circles or ellipses around the sun. They're actually creating spirals through time. And so we have the sun, though, is basically the main current. It's incoherent energy. And the planets are acting like Tesla step-down transformers, so that Mercury is the frequency of how we think. Venus is the frequency of what we love, of what we like, of what we're attracted to. I don't know if you know anything about the Fibonacci number series or the golden mean, the divine proportion. Okay, so this is the number that Johannes Kepler wrote is the ratio that God uses to create like from like. It's attraction. It's the shape of the spiraling arms of the Milky Way galaxy. It's the shape, it's the ratio if you count sunflower seeds or petals on a daisy. I mean, but it ultimately was the key to the book and the movie, The Da Vinci Code, because it was the key to that, where they had the numbers that were the Fibonacci numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and then it goes 13, 24, 35, 24, 39, 55, 89, 104. I mean, and as you go further and further along that, by adding up each number, you get closer and closer to this magic number that we call the golden mean or the divine proportion. That's 1.6. It's actually 1.62. Well, no, it's actually 1.6180339 forever and ever and ever and ever. It's like pi. It doesn't express in decimal. And yet that number is, it's the number of attraction, of beauty. It's the aesthetics of perfection. And here's the crazy thing. It takes Venus 224 and a half days to go around the sun. It takes Earth 365 and a quarter days to go around the sun. 365 and a quarter divided by 224 and a half is the golden mean. It's 1.63.
Saw that one coming.
And so Venus is the planet of what's beautiful and what we love, because it's just a frequency vibration to what we have here. Now, Mars is the first planet outside of the Earth, and therefore Mars represents in some ways how we go out. It's how we make boundaries. Mars is the god of war, but that's just the patriarchal take on it. Mars is really the boundary of creating. I'm sorry, Mars is the energy of creating healthy boundaries. You know, Mars is about getting permission to touch someone or to step into their territory or to say no. But when you put it in testosterone amped up males, it's about going out and stepping on people who are less able or less fortunate. But Mars is how we create boundaries. We're back to Bruce Lipton as the boundaries being what creates consciousness. This is where my country ends and yours begins. I need to conquer your country because you're weaker than I am and you have manganese or oil or water or wheat or whatever. That's Mars, the god of war, but it's also the ego that creates safe boundary. As we go out to the next planets, we get to Jupiter and Saturn, and these are the gas giants, and they're less personal. Jupiter's how we grow. It's a 12-year cycle, and it's really, it's not about learning how to read. It's getting a PhD in linguistics. You know, it's the long journey. It's not about commuting back and forth to work. It's about taking a 3-year journey if you were British to India, or maybe a 200-year journey if you're Indian to conquer England. I don't want to go there, but things have a way of coming back. But the thing here is that Jupiter goes outside the personal into the social realms. It's a 12-year cycle. You know, Chinese astrology is based upon a sign for a year. So that every year is a different, this is the year of the rabbit or the year of the wood ox or whatever. Jupiter spends about 1 year in each sign. It takes 12 years to go around once. And China is a culture that goes back to Confucius that's all about social order. It's not about individual wants and needs. It's based upon Jupiter. I mean, this stuff is so crazy when you begin to look at how it represents our cultures. Then you go out past Jupiter, and the farthest planet out that anyone could see until we began to use superpowered telescopes was Saturn. And Saturn is the end of the road. You know, it's Douglas Adams, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the, to the Universe. Saturn is the restaurant at the edge of the universe. Saturn is the limit. Saturn, the symbol of Saturn, looks like a backwards ST. It's like a cross with a backwards S hanging on it. And in the English language, most Saturn words have an ST in it. Austere, constrict, test, stamina, set, stable. Even the limit of first and last, or big, bigger, biggest. We put a Saturn. Saturn is the ultimate limit. Saturn is also Satan, because it was the invisible angels fell through the gates of Saturn and then became material. That's the fallen world. When you talk about the fall, that's intra-Saturnian, because Saturn is the limit of what you can perceive. And that was thought up until the 1700s by science, that was the limit. That there was nothing that was animated, nothing that moved outside of Saturn, until we discovered Uranus in the 1700s. Uranus is the planet that now is associated with Aquarius. It's the electrical planet. This is when Benjamin Franklin was discovering that lightning was electricity, and Galvani was taking dead frogs and connecting them up to batteries and watching their legs twitch and go, holy smokes, our nervous system is electrical. And this was invisible energy, but that was the beginning of the electrical breakthrough. Uranus, astrologically, is about sudden, unexpected breakthrough change. It can be catastrophic, like when lightning strikes and burns down a forest. But typically, that forest will grow back stronger and more invigorated than it ever was, because Uranus's job is to clear the deck of the noise. Then the next planet out is Neptune, and Neptune's so far out that it's hard to know. It's dreamy, and Neptune is about imagination. Neptune is the planet of delusion. When Neptune was discovered, it was considered to be the planet that was associated with psychosis, with delusion, with confusion. Well, what is confusion? It's a Greek origin word. Fusion is when two things melt together. Con is with, like a conjunction is when two things join or are joined by a part of speech. But confusion is basically what happens when my ego loses its sense of boundary, because I don't know where I end and you begin. Now, that can be either confusing and fearful, or it also can be love, because love is confusing because the boundaries of Saturn don't seem to hold up anymore. So Neptune is imagination, it's dreams, it's illusions. It's interesting that the once every 400 year conjunction of Neptune takes 168 years, 165 years to go around once. Pluto, the lord of the underworld, the hidden realms, takes 248 years to go around once. They align every 4 centuries for about 10 years. They did that last in 1890 when Freud was writing The Interpretation of Dreams. You can't make this shit up this good. This is the rise of theosophy. This is mediumship in England was just out of control, mesmer and hypnosis and all of that kind of stuff. So Neptune is the, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they're all outside of Saturn. And these are the dream realms, the electrical thoughts that we have that are not conscious. This is the aha breakthrough. And it is also, Pluto is death is not the end. That's when Saturn was the limit. Saturn was the, the bringer of death. Saturn was the end. It was finality. Now we know that Saturn is the illusion of finality that actually brings about a metamorphosis. The best way to understand Pluto is to look at the caterpillar and understand that a caterpillar would never get into a cocoon if it thought it was going to die. And in fact, it does. The caterpillar totally deconstructs. This is Nietzsche's nihilism. That which is most important deconstructs, and then it reconstructs at a new level. The caterpillar doesn't fear getting into the cocoon because it doesn't have an ego like we do. We would say, hell no, I won't go. I'm not going to do that because my ego is me. And where the fact of the matter is that we are not our ego, and we don't need to die physically to encounter Pluto. Every time someone says no, every time you lose a job, lose a loved one, whatever, there's a little bit of death. In fact, even, the concept of petite, I can't think of the French word right now, a little orgasm, a little death, petite mort. Sorry, petite mort. This is basically at that moment of merging in the sexual union, the ego doesn't have control. It gives it up in that moment. I love the quote from Trungpa Chogyam Rinpoche, a Buddhist who one of the people who brought Buddhism to the West a bit of a mixed blessing story, crazy wisdom master. But he said, enlightenment is the ego's greatest disappointment. It's brilliant because you can't bring it with you. I also love William Blake, who wanted as his epitaph on his grave, it's not on his grave, but he wanted on his grave, William Blake, born 1757, died many times since. That's Pluto. So we have Pluto now, which has just spent 20 years in Capricorn. Pluto's job is to kill, to destruct, to deconstruct. And Capricorn is the sign of the three-dimensional reality. Capricorn is about hierarchy. It's about government. It's about banking. It's about fundamentals. And so as Pluto is moving through Capricorn in the United States, our 250-year Constitution went to shit. It's like it's basically fallen apart. We can't make it work the way we think it should be working. It was about banks having major meltdowns during this period of time. It was about the decay and the beginning of rebuilding physical structures, at least in the United States, of roads and bridges and things of that sort. And now as Pluto is moving out of, or has moved out of Capricorn and is just beginning to touch or make waves in Aquarius, this is why that is the background for Neptune, which changes signs every 14 years, Uranus, which changes signs every 7 years, and Saturn, which changes signs every 2.5 years. All of these four signs are changing. All of these four planets are changing signs within the same year, and that would be 2025, 2024 into 2025. That's what's going on. I mean, and again, that's only one thing, but it's, we astrologers, we have computers. We've looked back. When was the last time something like this has ever happened? And we can't find it. Now, on top of that, we have the whole technological thing, which is changing the game also completely. And that's a separate issue that I'd love to talk about, but we may not get to it today. I just did something. I don't know whether I disconnected. I'm not sure what happened.
Oh, no, I can hear you. You're good. You're good. Yeah. Wow. I don't want to interrupt you. I want to find out more about, what we think the technology, because obviously it's all speculation when it comes to technology. But before we dive into that.
No, it's not all speculation.
Oh, go on then.
No, because prophecy on one level, it contains two things. On one level, prophecy is having enough data points in the past that you continue the trajectory. Secondly, prophecy also has to acknowledge cataclysm. And cataclysm can be an event like Steve Jobs and coming out with the iPad or the iPod.
Yep.
These were cataclysmic breakthroughs that are still having ramifications. Cataclysmic breakthroughs were before Nikola Tesla came. This entire universe that we live in would have been impossible because there was no wireless communication. There was no electricity that could be conducted through wires. There was no 50, 60 cycles a second. There were no electric rotary motors. There was no hydroelectricity. All of this was like, no one thought of it in the late 1800s. And by the early 1920s, it had changed everything. So yes, there are those kinds of things around the corner. And yet we have so many data points on the on the scientific inquiry and breakthroughs that are occurring faster than they've ever occurred in levels, in dimensions of reality that are outside of our five senses. And so we know that the larger shift is basically evolution is moving us to higher and higher frequencies, and therefore from physical into metaphysical or non-physical dimensions. 50 years ago, we couldn't say, hey, you and I are here. Where the hell is here? I'm serious. I know it's funny, but we've now basically proven John Wheeler's concept of quantum non-locality. Here used to be here. It used to be at a point in space, and now it's a waveform that vibrates at the speed of light. And here can be not only anywhere, but it could also be anyone. I'm here in Seattle in the depth of winter, and you're here in Melbourne at the height of the heat of the summer. Where's here?
Yeah, it's all potential in the quantum, isn't it? It's potentially everywhere. Well, yeah, it's all potential at that point.
It's everything, everywhere, all at
All at
once. No,
once.
but this now is both the great potential and the great problem, because I don't know if you know anything about Buckminster Fuller. Does that name register at all? Okay, so for those people listening who don't, I think that if we survive everything a couple of hundred years in the future, Buckminster Fuller will be looked at as the great intellect, or maybe three great intellects of the 20th century: Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and Buckminster Fuller, perhaps. He's the guy who invented the geodesic dome, but he also invented or discovered the mathematics of thinking. And his great work is called Synergetics: Explorations into the Mathematics of Thinking. Bucky Fuller's final book, and he wrote a ton of them, I don't know, 8, 10, no, more like 12 or 15 books. His last book he wrote was called Utopia or Oblivion. And it was his prospect for the future of humanity that was basically built on the concept that in 1941, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president then of the United States, got on radio and made a broadcast that was carried around the world live, the first time that humanity around the world locked into a moment and listened to someone's words. At that moment, "This is a day that shall live in infamy," was the famous quote that came from that. But what Bucky Fuller said, that with electronic technology, and Fuller, you may have heard the term, the medium is the message, but that really is actually a James Joyce pun that was a title of one of Marshall McLuhan's books called The Medium is the Massage. And it basically, the concept is that as we externalize biological functions and turn them into technology or media, whether it's the camera as the externalizing of the eye, or a home as the externalizing of our skin, or the wheel as an externalizing and rotary foot, that McLuhan claimed that the advent of use of electricity in the 20th century was the externalization of our nervous system. And with computers and the World Wide Web, his claim was that humans now have an exonervous system, that we are basically particles, really waves, but particles running around inside of an external brain, the World Wide Web, what Pierre Teilhard de Chardin called the noosphere, perhaps. But the point here is that we have flipped out. And in the big difference between electrical and digital technology as a medium, as a way of interacting the inside to the outside, as compared to print-oriented book, that is subject-object differentiation. I am reading the book, me, it. There's a separation, and it was when books became mass-produced first by Gutenberg. Incidentally, that was another outer planet conjunction. That's in every other century conjunction of Uranus, the planet of technology, and Pluto, bringing things up from the depth that create transformation. 1455, the Gutenberg Bible was also a Uranus-Pluto conjunction. But reading a book is more important, that we're reading books, than what we are reading. Because from that process of the mass production of books, from that came the rise of perspective in art, nationalism, the Age of Enlightenment, all of these things that had to do with the separation of human from environment, because there's subject-object distance, that I'm not fully involved in hearing it and feeling it. What I'm doing is I'm looking at it and analyzing it. But with the electronic technology, and Marshall McLuhan said this was the reason for the rise of the hippies, the flower children, was the tribal drums that no longer were books the primary and only way of getting information, that sound, music, the tribal drums actually brought people together wherever they were on the planet instantaneously. And now I'm making a full circle. The thing that makes everything different now, with all of these planets changing signs and all of the connections that this is making historically to precedents on these same rhythm cycles, has to do with the instantaneity of the digital environment. In other words, it used to take, if you look at some of the, you look at Freud's interpretation of dreams, it took 40, 50, 60 years for depth psychology to become grounded as a concept, because it was all individual one-to-one transference of knowledge and information, or by reading a book. Now something goes viral on the internet and everyone has the same crazy, stupid idea at the same moment, or the same enlightened breakthrough of an experience, that whatever that experience may be, whether it may be some new artificial intelligence or augmented reality or drones that are actually now communicating. I have no idea, but it's that instantaneity. Uranus is like lightning striking. It's the aha experience. And so that's what's sitting behind the potential for everything changing on a dime, regardless how bad it might look locally right now.
Hi there, guys. I wanted to take a quick moment just to introduce you to my one-to-one coaching. It's something that I deeply love doing. As you can tell, conscious conversation is such a massive part of my life. And having one-to-one, deep, meaningful conversations with people where I get to show up as your brother or as the coach or as your mentor has been such a gift for me personally, and a gift for lots of the people that I have supported on the journey of living a more spiritually empowered, spiritually powered, spiritually aligned life. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's some examples of people all around the world that have experienced profound transformations through this coaching experience.
Amrit is a fantastic coach.
In a few sessions, he got to a depth that I'd only experienced before working with certain medicines.
He's gone through a lot of the struggles that you're probably facing, and Amrit's been a really strong, supportive figure in my journey.
In control of myself.
I'm kinder to myself.
I actually have that vision and a purpose.
I do feel like I'm a better version of myself already.
Amazing energy.
He was easy to talk to, which made me easy to trust him.
Working with Amrit at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and really I was bouncing out of bed.
Whenever I get off the calls with Amrit, best money we've ever spent.
I would not recommend him because I don't want everyone to know about him, and then I won't be able to book him. If he gets too busy, I won't get my turn.
I would say absolutely.
There's no way you can work with Amrit for a period of time without being transformed.
So if you're considering him as a coach, do not hesitate, because you won't be disappointed.
Alrighty, so hopefully that's inspiring your evolution onwards and upwards. And if you are so inspired to evolve, you can book in a one-to-one call with me directly at www.amrit.coach/life. And guys, if I can say so myself, I do think this is something quite special. Most people that I see building things online don't really work with people this deeply, this intimately, one-on-one as things start to grow, just because it is so time intensive. And yet I'm so deeply passionate about the transformation that comes from one-to-one coaching that just isn't available anywhere else. It would be my absolute honor and a pleasure to support your spiritual awakening, your spiritual path, your spiritual unfoldment. It is my life's work. I look forward to seeing you in the call. Back to today's podcast. Rick, you've spent a lot of time in India. You referred to us before as potentially humans that are, that you use the word not, almost like in our meat suit, and then you've like everything you're describing, what was it, BFPs? They all seem to be these nodes in a network. I'd love to sort of just scratch my curiosity in terms of, have you contemplated Indra's net in and around all of this and how it all?
Well, only for about 50 years now. Actually, it's more like 55 years, because I think I was about 18 or 19 when I fell deeply into, the Vedas, and I had some brilliant teachers from, that point in my philosophical studies academically. And of course, I can't say that there were no substances involved in my life in the late 60s. as someone who experienced the 60s and actually remembers them. But Indra's net is something that, yes, came into my life back, I'm 75, back 55 years ago or so. And that, as I'm sure you know, is basically this jeweled net where every jewel on the net contains the reflection of every other jewel on the net. And here we step into a very fascinating realm that in astrology is often referred to as the nodes or the moon's nodes. But every planet has nodes, because a node is basically, it's a Latin word. And in Latin, node means knot, K-N-O-T. That's what the word node means. Now, in astrology, the lunar nodes or the moon's nodes, which are considered to be an absolute primal piece of an astrological study on anything, is the place where the moon's orbit going around the Earth intersects with the Earth's orbit going around the sun. It's like two sheets of paper intersecting, and two planes intersect in a straight line. And so this axis called the lunar nodes or the nodal axis is the point at which the hum of the moon intersects or interferes with the hum of the Earth, creating a node, which the Vedas call Maya, because that node is the interplay of these invisible dualistic energies of, to use the Chinese Taoist metaphor of yin and yang, whatever you want to call them. I love, there's an early Veda that's one of my favorites. It's a hymn of creation, and it's like most hymns in the Vedas, goes on for pages. But it says, in the beginning there was neither light nor darkness. There was neither up nor down. And of course, everyone goes, in the beginning there was neither this nor that. In the beginning there was neither male nor, it goes on for pages. In the beginning there was neither existence nor non-existence. And then it says, but who knows for sure? Only he, and I like to say he, she, but who knows for sure? Only he, she, who sits on her throne in highest heaven, only he knows for sure. Or perhaps he does not. I love it. Okay, but the thing about nodes is that if I clap my hands and make a sound, or if I take a hammer and hit someone over the head, I'm not recommending that you do that, please. But what's happening is that there is no physicality to the hammer. It's illusion. The apparent physicality of a hammer perceived by our touch or our skin is basically perceiving the nodes of high frequency atomic cycling that are cycling at hundreds of trillions of cycles a second. And so just like the moon going around the Earth once a moon, and the Earth going around the sun once a year, just like they create a node, there are nodes created as the entire universe is blinking on and off at hundreds of, actually it's really more like trillions of cycles a second. We have no way of measuring it. It's so fast. And yet what appears to be solid, my desk and the wobble of the camera because I'm hitting the desk, if that was being hit by a cosmic wave, a cosmic ray, that ray would be so high frequency, it wouldn't even know there was a solid. In fact, cosmic rays pass through Earth without even slowing down or blipping. They don't know that solidness is an illusion. And that illusion is based upon harmonies or vibrations tying themselves into knots, which is just an English word for node. And so the nodes on Indra's net become incredibly important. And here's one other thing from the beginning of when computers became a thing, and I was an early early into computers. In fact, one of my weird claims to, well, not fame, but something, is that I managed the first retail store in the world that sold software without selling hardware. People would come in and say, this is 1982. They would come in and say, I just bought a computer, and they say, I need to come here to buy software. What is it? And I'd show them something and say, it's this $500. And they go, I'm paying $500 for this little disc that I don't even know what it is, but the point is, which is incidentally another example of how physical is becoming metaphysical. The wealthiest people on the planet used to be in Saturnian realms. They owned real estate. By the way, estate has that Saturn in it, but real estate was property. Now the wealthiest people in the world own vibrations. They own operating systems, which are just frequency vibrations, and they're operating at billions of cycles a second, gigahertz. A hertz is just one cycle a second. And so the wealthiest people own portions of the electromagnetic spectrum that they rented or leased from governments that allow them to own the 23.5 gigabyte spectrum that then they use to make cell phones or 5G or whatever. But you can see all of these are part of that vibration of from physical to non-physical dimension. So nodes are absolutely important because they create the interplay of the apparent jewels on Indra's net and the apparent nodes on a network. And one of the basic primary concepts of networks going back to the late 70s, early 80s was the power of the network is derived only by the number of nodes on the network. If you're on a network of one, there's no power. If you're on a network of three, well, that's a very self-reflective bubble network. But if you're on a network that has Wikipedia and Google and AI and whatever, it's not infinite, but it feels like it is. And now we're getting to the real meaning of why nodes and Indra's net are so important, that we all have technological access through these high frequency circuits that were based upon mathematical analysis of what happens when I beat this frequency against that. And then I take out only this frequency, and then I hold it here until it builds a certain charge. We call that a capacitor. It blows the charge, and all this stuff makes this. It makes Zoom. How the hell does this happen? Well, it's because nodes. And not only that, we have individual connections to the nodes. My 100,000 or so people that watch my my YouTube videos, or your people that tune into, this is your node, but all of those people are on nodes also that they interface with. And so it's almost like, I think it was Schopenhauer who said that everybody's dreaming, and everyone who's a character in my dream is also a dream in which I'm a character in with all of my dreams.
Perfect segue, because you're referring to dreams and you were mentioning cosmic rays before, sort of moving through the earth without it even the perception is what's driving the solidity of matter in some ways. And I couldn't help but, as you were talking about the precession of, the earth somehow is spinning forwards, but when you zoom out a little bit, you said we're moving through back to the age of Aquarius. The time seems to be moving forwards, but simultaneously backwards as well, which
you've stood in the ocean, haven't you?
Yeah.
All right. When you stand in the ocean, and you just go down to the ocean, you don't look at the shore. Can you tell whether the tide's coming in or out?
It's all
by
happening. Yeah.
And so a big wave, hits you, but then there's an undertow that pulls you out, and then a bigger wave hits you, and then you're in deeper water, and you realize that there's actually this flow of energy coming in. But meanwhile, the undertow is growing stronger and stronger. Astrology and the universe is waves within waves within waves. And yes, the planets are mostly moving around what we call clockwise, but the wobble of Earth, because of the moon's interference in the Earth's spin on its 23.5 degree axis, the Earth is actually wobbling backwards to the motion of all the planets. And that's why it looks like the ages are going backwards, what's called the precession of the equinox, the moving backward of the seasonal time of the solstices and the equinoxes.
Yeah, for me, as soon as I tried to start to ground into it moving forwards and then also moving backwards, that waves upon waves, I sort of started to realize, oh, it's probably moving forwards on a meta scale ahead of that, and then probably backwards again and forwards again and backwards again. And it's like, wow, we're back trying to contemplate infinity.
However, when we put our feet on the ground here on Earth and we look at our local system of BFPs, of these particles that are really big, we can begin to see how the outside and the inside, how the upstairs and the downstairs, how the cosmic and the subatomic realms are actually one and the same. I don't know if you know the work of Fred Allen Wolf. Have you ever had Fred on your show? I don't know if he's doing public stuff anymore. He wrote books like Taking the Quantum Leap and The Dreaming Universe. He was a tenured PhD theoretical physicist at the University of California, San Diego. But he wrote books like The Yoga of Time Travel and the Eagle's Quest of the Eagle. Fred is one of those people who actually understands that the breakthroughs of quantum physics actually are not just about subatomic discoveries. They're actually about the discovery of how consciousness works. There's a fantastic book. I'm looking just to see, because I never remember the author's name. The name of the book is How the Hippies Saved Physics. It's not a funny book. It's not a casual book. It's a deep dive written by a guy who's a tenured physics professor at MIT. And it's about how the story of Fred Wolf and Jack Sarfati and a handful of other physicists in the 70s began meeting on a regular basis, trying to figure out what the physics of consciousness change is, how this relates to quantum physics, what the reality of remote viewing and all these phenomena that seem to break the Newtonian concepts of physics. And the breakthroughs that they made have, led to incredible breakthroughs in physics, including quantum computing, which is another thing we haven't really talked about and probably shouldn't.
Rick, as you said, there is so much ground yet left to be covered in this podcast. But as we draw to a close, I feel like we've covered so much ground. And for those that are tuning in at this particular point, just for the time that's coming up ahead of them, this episode's released at the commencement of 2025. Words of wisdom, words of heart, anything you'd like to.
Thank you. And you asked that, and I kind of stepped over it. You asked it. This is the second or third time you've asked this question. Okay, a few things, really simple, straightforward. Obviously, things that I've thought about more than I want to because of what's going on in the world and because of how many people I know and how many people through social media I know of that are in states of dramatic suffering and crisis. And so I've given this a lot of thought. First of all, I come back to something that you kind of opened with, and that is, if you meet someone who knows what's going on and has all the answers, I don't care what it is. They don't. And that includes whatever your favorite conspiracy theory is. And I'm not saying that any of these what's called a conspiracy theory. I mean, look, there's another judgment on that. The word conspiracy just means to conspire. We're back to con. It means to breathe together. That's the meaning of the word conspiracy, is to breathe together. And conspiracy didn't take on a negative connotation until the CIA tried to create disinformation around Kennedy's assassination back in 1963, where all of a sudden conspiracy theories were basically, they're not real. But regardless of that, whatever your reality construct is, whatever you believe, whatever side of whatever issues you're on, they're not black and white the way we would like to think they are. And more problematically, even those issues which may be more black and white than others resonate so closely with other issues that make it complicated to be a purist about any issue, because it then brings in people and organizations and businesses that basically agree with you on this one piece, but all of a sudden everywhere else they fall short of. So it's very complicated from that standpoint. Now, having said that, it's very simple from another standpoint. And it's something that I close almost every one of my live appearances and internet appearances with. And it's this little play on what I think was created maybe 40 or 50 years ago, about recycling, and that's think globally, act locally. And I always say think cosmically, act locally, because it does no good at all to think about your point of view and my point of view from a larger perspective, or even though I disagree with you about something so strongly, my goal should not be try to convince you of that you're wrong and I'm right. Instead, our goals really need to be, how can I understand why you've come to that conclusion, even if I maintain it's a wrong conclusion? That's a perfectly okay thing to believe that someone has come to a conclusion that's different than your conclusion. But understanding why they came to that conclusion basically allows people to have conversations without the illusion of thinking that I'm going to rationally talk you out of whatever it is that you already know is real. Not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So my advice for all of us, and I say all of us, I include my advice to me. And does that mean I always follow my advice? No, I'm a human. I find myself sucked into dumb conversations that become arguments about stuff that I know I should have known better. I should have just listened and felt rather than tried to say, yeah, but here's what the truth is, and so the goal really, I believe, needs to be in acting locally. How do we act compassionately? How do we act consciously? How do we take the expanded liminal mind that is using astrology or archetypes or therapy or yoga practices or whatever tools we might have, love, I don't care what tools you have, but how do we take what we feel from this and then apply this towards compassion, kindness? And you see, I have this thing about people's first books and last books. Jung's last book that he wrote before he died in, I think, 1955 or 56, he wrote a book called The Undiscovered Self, which is really about Pluto. It's about the hell realms. It's about that which we can't know. And in that book, he has this little piece that it's kind of like a throwaway that basically says that peace on earth will never be created by politicians basically running around the planet faster and faster trying to figure out how to enforce peace. That will never create peace through treaties. The way and the only way that peace will be acquired will be the peace created in the individual minds of everyone on the planet. Now, you might recognize this as Mahayana Buddhism 101. No one gets off until everyone gets off. It's like we are in this together. I often think of, Paul McCartney's line, I am you as you are me, as we are all together, goo goo gajoob, that's, we are all part of each other's dreams. And yet we can think as cosmically as we want, but that's all bullshit unless we apply it by helping the person, through a door with the extra package, or whether it's not waiting for election day to vote for what's important to us by buying, recycled, clothing or recycled paper or less plastics, or being conscious of how we live our lives, and again, I know that people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. I mean, the amount of, fuel that's used to get me to India and back and wherever else I might travel, is on one level obscene. But acting locally in however it is that we can, little by little by little, is what the changes are going to, be created. The changes are going to be made by individuals playing soccer with Palestinians and Israelis on the same team. It's not going to be made by dropping bombs, or even by trying to enforce a peace or a racial equality or a gender equality through laws. I mean, the way that people change their understanding and minds about whatever homophobias or gender phobias that they may have. The way that that changes is when someone has someone who's a really close friend that goes through an experience that basically it touches home. And again, that's acting locally. That's being compassionate and understanding what's going on and not thinking that everything is just coming from some authority place and you're being told that people in Michigan are eating their cats because they came from Haiti to take over our country. And again, I'm just using American analogies because that's what I know best. But I know that those same things work everywhere because I travel a lot. So what do? We know that we don't have the answers, even on the answers that we know we have, which is a scary thing for the ego. 2, we listen to people who have very different perceptions, not because we think they're trying to convince us that they're right, but because we want to understand how the hell did they come to that conclusion. I had someone post on my website today on my December update this absolute categorical statement that that the drones are basically dropping bird flu. There's drone sightings all over the planet, over the last weeks, month or so. Now, they may be, they may not be, but there is just, it's just, and I basically responded to this person, perhaps knowing I shouldn't have, they're just letting it go. But, I basically was saying, well, this is your perception, but there are other people who think other things about this, and time will tell. We may know and we may not. And the person responded very angrily, no, this is the way it is. And at that point in time, I just invisibled them on my, on my channel. So I think that part of what we have to be is we have to be flexible. We also have to avoid falling into rabbit holes based upon what appears to be happening top down in governments all around the world as we move toward this kind of lockdown. I use that word purposefully because whether it's a physical governmental lockdown based upon a virus, and it's my contention, and this is not the voice of a COVID denier, but my contention is that COVID was not the virus, that fear was the virus, and COVID was simply the carrier. That's another story, but that touches the same thing as what are we afraid of? We're afraid that the other side's going to win and we're not going to have our way of life. We're not going to have our fast computer, our internet. We're not going to have organic food. We're not going to have the ability to pull our students, our children out of schools and teach them what there's so many things we're differently afraid of, and yet as we begin to understand that we are all afraid of only one thing, and that's not being happy. We're all afraid of having our life being taken away from us. We all want the same thing. We all want to just be happy, but we feel like I can't be happy as long as I know that you're doing this. Even if I don't know who you are, even if we'll never meet, somehow that just stirs something up in me because I have unresolved stuff in me that when I see you doing that, there's a part of me that maybe, gee, I want to do that, but I can't because my boss, my parents, my wife, my husband won't let me. So therefore you shouldn't be able to do it. There's many other motivations. So what do we do at this point in time? We realize we don't have all the answers. We remain flexible. We come back to being positive individually and interactively on as local level as we can, meaning how we do our laundry and how we make our tea if we live alone, or how we interact with those people that we love or that we're partnering with, even if we can't stand some aspects of them. It means how we shop and what we spend our money on. It means also how we interact locally with those people who theoretically should be representing us, whether it means writing letters or writing emails or participating in some form of, not everyone is an activist, but there's very different types of activism. For Mahatma Gandhi, weaving his cotton to make his own clothes was absolutely radical activism. So we have to be careful about judging people who are not out on the streets marching. It's the people who are out on the streets marching and are still spending, $10 a day on their Starbucks, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't have coffee or whatever, but you understand what I'm saying. And so we have to be flexible, we have to be aware, and we have to do inch by inch working on ourselves, because that's the only way I can improve my relationship with you is by me improving my relationship with myself. I mean, there's a whole deep dive here about the astrology of relationships, and people saying, I had someone who wrote me an email a number of years ago that said, what goes well with a Taurus? And I said, have you tried it? Have you tried a 1987 Cabernet? I mean, it's stupid to think that just because someone has this sign or that sign, that means they're my soulmate or twin flame or spirit, whatever. And again, this is not me being cynical. This is not me in any way being negative about love or even romantic love. But there's that question of how do you make illusion become real? Because that's what Neptune's job is, the dream and the illusion out beyond Saturn. And Saturn's job is to make it real. And so we say we're disillusioned because when the rainbow is real, it's never as cool as it was when it was a rainbow. But disillusionment is not a bad thing. Illusionment is the danger. So how do we, inch by inch, day by day, person by person, strive to make things more real by leaning on the Dalai Lama's true religion, which he said is kindness. And I think kindness and compassion, coupled with the willingness to not know, is really where we need to be. I don't care what your politics are. I care, how you live your life. I care what your heart is. We're back to soul, is where we started. We're not about reaching God. We're not about trying to be perfect. We're not trying to solve all our issues by getting into the heavens and knowing that my Jupiter is square my Saturn, or trying to go to Mars. We're just going to go to Mars with Elon and bring all our shit there. So what? It's basically not about ascension. Not that we shouldn't be thinking of ascension, but we have to always be balancing that with going deep, with the descension, with the descending into what Joseph Campbell called the archetype of the hero's journey, whether it's individual therapy, whether it's psychotherapy, whether it's meditation and yoga practices, whether it's plant medicine. I mean, there's so many different ways to do that, but that's really what we need to be doing. And I threatened to talk for 90 minutes. And say, that was my opening sentence. Now, what do you want to talk about?
At the risk of being a bit broad brush, I couldn't help but just wanted to speak to, what I couldn't help but visualize at my end as you were sharing that was this technological age that we're stepping into with the age of Aquarius ahead of us. There is very much, technology has this and you mentioned, you worked in the place that, sold the very first place to sell just software. And it's just so binary. It's 0 and 1. I couldn't help but see that the binary is arising, and you said, think cosmically, live locally. And just, the polarities are so much like everyone's kind of going, oh, can you feel the polarities? Like we can feel the zeros and the ones and the zeros and the ones. And maybe that's going to be even more coming through. But ultimately, and I know how much of a hippie I sound like when I say this, but allow me just my moment, which is, the zeros and the ones are very black and white, but at the heart of it, humanity is all about the rainbow in between, right? And acknowledging each other. I have a poster
over my bed that was actually a Xerox gift when they were first getting into software that I got 40 years ago or so more. And it basically is a black and white photograph of a spiraling a conch shell,
Yeah.
And the caption in the bottom in black and white says, between the black and white, there's a world of gray. And yes, what you're saying is very important. This is another thing that Buckminster Fuller talked about a lot. And that is how the nervous system is basically binary. A nerve either fires or it doesn't. It's on or it's off. It's 0 or it's 1. And yet by manipulating zeros and ones, we get to the magic of what we're doing right here now. We get to the magic of consciousness, which is not based upon the particle on, off, yes, no, 0, 1. It's based upon the hum that the nodes make as that rhythm intersects with all the other rhythms around it. But, whatever you just said, yes.
Yeah. Rick, thank you so much for today's podcast. Goodness me, I'm so grateful for your time, energy, generosity, and insights. And also, as you mentioned, this is, we're discussing Indra's net and you're like 55 plus. This is your life's work. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you, the way you do you. And yeah, man, so grateful for you carrying the awareness that you are for us at this time.
And thank you for the jewel on your end of the network of Indra that that you're creating, have created.
Thank you. You inspired soul, you made it through to the end of another incredible episode. My goodness, welcome to the new year. Rick setting it off with a flying start. Happy New Year's, everybody. And I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank all of you for being here, subscribing to the channel. It's just such an honor to be your brother walking this path by your side. Thank you so much for your love, support, blessings. To all of you that have subscribed, thank you, thank you, thank you. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please do take a moment. As I'm saying the word subscribe, the subscribe button below is lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution. Please hit that bell notification icon. Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon. Episodes like this coming out twice every week. Let's start the new year off to an amazing, amazing, amazing trajectory. I'm so inspired for what 2025 Touchwood has in store for all of us. Now, on screen for you guys to go even deeper to keep your inspirations flowing and your evolution brewing and blooming and blossoming. Can you tell I'm excited about 2025? I'm going to pop on screen another couple of episodes for you to dive in even deeper. These episodes are hand-selected by YouTube based on your viewing preferences. It's choosing what is absolutely the best for you. So these are hand-picked for you by YouTube. Go on, take your pick, make your click, and I will continue to see you in the next one. I'll see you there.